Yesterday afternoon, at a special meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board, the Board voted to approve terms of reference for the independent civilian review of G20 policing that it will be holding. These terms will set the framework and chart a course for that review and define the parameters in which the person chosen to lead the review will be able to examine the conduct of police during the weekend of the G20. The Board also agreed that it would publicly name the person who will be leading that review on September 23rd. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association will be monitoring how this process unfolds closely. We've been at the forefront of advocacy efforts to pursue greater accountability for what happened during the G20 weekend, and we trust that the Board's undertaking to hold an independent civilian review of the role of the Toronto Police will be an important component of that process. The terms of reference as set out by the Board yesterday are very broad. They will allow whoever is chosen as the independent reviewer for this process to have a great deal of leeway to conduct this investigation as they see fit. From the CCLA's perspective, giving the reviewer a great deal of leeway to conduct this process as he or she sees fit is a good thing. That will be required because it's unclear from the outset what may or may not be discovered. The process may need to evolve as it unfolds, and it's important that the person in charge of that process has the authority to pursue whatever avenues he or she believes need to be pursued. The person chosen to lead the independent civilian review will be focusing largely on the role that the Board and Toronto Police Service played in the policing of G20. That will allow the reviewer to probe the role of the Board and the role of the police, as well as many sub-issues that arise in the context of both of those organizations. This means that the reviewer will look at how the Chief and Board interacted. Was there sufficient communication around planning and carrying out of G20 policing? Were the appropriate policy frameworks in place? Is there something that should be done different in the future? And if so, what that something may be. There's also specific issues that will be looked at in the course of the review, such as, did police use search and seizure powers appropriately? Did they use arrest powers appropriately? And was the use of force carried out in a manner that was appropriate in the context of a large-scale public demonstration? The reviewer will also be in a position to make recommendations to the Board about how the police and the Board could do things differently in the future. That will be an important development in the policy framework governing the policing of mass demonstration events that may take place in the future in Toronto. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association is generally supportive of the direction that the Board is taking with this process. This process the Board has undertaken will be an important component of seeking accountability for what happened during the G20 weekend. It's not the only piece of the puzzle, but it is an important piece, and we do thank the Board for undertaking this process. The independent civilian review held by the Toronto Police Services Board will, however, not accomplish what needs to be accomplished in the wake of the G20. It will probe the role of the Board and the police, but it will not probe the role of many other government agencies, many other political decision makers that were involved in this, in decision-making around the policing of this event. Federal officials from the Departments of Public Safety, Ministry of Justice, provincial officials as well, and police services that were flown into Toronto or bused into Toronto from all over the country to help with policing of this event. Those actors are not within the purview of this review. The independent civilian reviewer, who will be retained by the Board, does not have the authority to subpoena witnesses and does not have the authority to compel evidence. Moreover, the reviewer will not be able to make recommendations or judgments with respect to the conduct of federal officials, provincial officials, the RCMP, CSIS, or other police forces. So there is still a great deal of accountability that needs to be forthcoming in the wake of the G20. With that in mind, it has been and continues to be the CCLA's position that a full-blown federal public inquiry is necessary to probe and further unpack exactly what happened during the week of the G20 and to make sure that in the future events of this nature and magnitude are dealt with in a fashion that is more respectful of civil liberties. The right to freedom of assembly, the rights to freedom of expression, the right to be in a public space, even if you're not dissenting in any fashion or demonstrating in any fashion, those are all engaged in this context in this weekend, and those rights have not been fully vindicated by any process that has come in the wake of that weekend. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association believes that accountability measures that have been taken to date are not sufficient. This is why we continue to call on the federal government to convene a full-blown public inquiry into what happened during the G20 weekend. That inquiry must look at accountability in terms of policing, what happened, why it happened, and to make sure that it does not happen again in the same way. We believe the police went too far, that measures were taken that should not have been taken, and that that is unacceptable in a democratic society such as ours. We call on the federal government to take action to address these matters and to ensure the public that they take this seriously and that the public will not have to deal with this type of thing in any future mass demonstration that occurs in Canada. We believe that this is a mess that the federal government made, and we believe that it is a mess that the federal government should clean up. That is why we're calling upon the government to ensure that there is a full-blown public inquiry into what happened during the G20 weekend.